Hi everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you an interview with Pat, who's a senior scientist at AstraZeneca. Pat spoke so much about his career journey, why he left academia, and also compared mental health issues within academia and industry. Luckily, Pat is coming back next week to talk about his day-to-day life at AstraZeneca and also again in 2 weeks' time to talk to us about the recruitment process and how he landed the job itself. So there will be so many lessons. There's so much wisdom Pat can share with us. So please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on all of this information. And I hope you'll enjoy today's episode. Can you tell us, a little bit about your career journey? How did you get to a senior scientist role?
Yes, so how did I get to senior scientist? Well, I still first did my undergraduate. Then from that on, I moved on to the sort of PhD days. I was thinking, I still want to pursue the science. I want to do the doctoral level studies. It was almost like a badge of honor, Ooh, it'd be nice to be a doctor. Just had those two letters. I actually liked it. I actually enjoyed it. And then through sheer luck, through a friend who used to do their undergraduate placement there, I found out about this really, really interesting job position within my current company and applied there. And one thing led to another, and here we are. I'm working for them, and internally been promoted to a senior scientist. So, yeah, here we are sitting here talking with Matt.
Brilliant, brilliant, Matt. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about your PhD journey, what it was like for you. So can you tell people a little bit about that? Because I know.
PhD days. Gosh, that's that seems like a century ago. It was before COVID, so that says a lot. Um, so my PhD, it started off as a sort of just like learning new techniques, learning the ropes, because I moved on in a similar field, still biochemistry, still doing gene editing, but in a completely new setting. Basically, previously I used to work on like a mammalian cells, but in a lung cell line. This was just classical HEC293 cells, and then moved on to some embryonic stem cells. And from the PhD, it was fascinating to learn of these new techniques and kind of like day-to-day experience the science, the joys of proving that your hypothesis is right, and the sadness of another contamination, a culture, or like not achieving significance levels. No, and
Mm.
that's sort of a PhD progression of mine, just the joys, the ups and downs of life. And then at the end of it, a really big struggle to get through the thesis, do the writing, and submit. Boom, done. Two letters added to the name, doctor.
So what did you do after?
Yes. So after I completed the sort of vanity project, because honestly, we can discuss this further, but nowadays I don't believe it is as necessary. I moved on to be a scientist within AstraZeneca, where I worked again on similar things, gene editing, but this time in a completely new setting. Of course, it's more about biotherapeutics, producing drugs, and about improving the quality of people's lives. I worked there, tried out new techniques, tried to be interested, tried to find out the reasoning behind why we do things, and so I progressed to become a senior scientist.
Okay, right. So you moved directly from academia to industry. So, you know, what made you leave academia? What was it that, made you feel like, right, I had enough, I need to do something else?
So at the very last days of my PhD, towards the end of it, I had a sort of branching, the sort of decision point. Do I want to proceed into academia, or do I want to go down the industry route? And I must say, academia has a lot of ups and downs, and the downs slightly outweigh the ups. I did not like the sort of instability of the jobs. As a postdoc, you have short-term contracts, usually have 2 years or 1 year funding, or maybe 5 years if you're lucky. But at the end of it, the same cycle just repeats. I have to
Mm.
ask for more funding. And so as a postdoc, it's very difficult. It's mentally difficult. It's also difficult if you have a family, if you want to settle down in life. Whilst in industry, I thought I'd love to try it. The job's stable, At the time when I was applying, I thought to myself, okay, I'll just do the job, just do the science, be done with it, and live my life outside of work. Uh, in my pastime, I do love Lindy Hop dancing. So I do that as a hobby. And I thought it'll just pay for my hobby to enjoy it. Boy, was I actually wrong. My day-to-day job, I still very much enjoy it, and it's still my main passion. I still consider myself a scientist, not as a role, but as a self-description. Like that's my day-to-day modus operandi.
That's brilliant. Okay. No, no, that absolutely makes sense. And I am with you that there are a lot of ups and a lot of downs in academia, and definitely industry comes with stability. And still, as you said, it is intellectually challenging, definitely. But let's talk about this, in a minute. Um, so, let's talk a little bit about the downs itself. So, how do you find, the mental side of things, the mental health in academia as compared to industry? And how did you cope with it in academia, and
Hmm.
what is it like now?
So I must say, having gone through the whole ringer myself, I find that academia is a lot more challenging on the mental aspect. Now, luckily enough, I did manage to avoid the worst sides of doing academia, doing a PhD. However, I did suffer the PhD through my friend who had depression, and I saw how difficult it is for them, and I just wouldn't wish it upon anybody else.
Uh,
I find that in academia, the sort of towards the last stages of your PhD, you often have deadlines, you have life pressures, you have to start writing up your thesis, you have to suddenly get a lot more data because you realize the holes in your story, in the narrative you're saying, you want to publish it, you're looking for a job, everything starts to add up. And I can't vouch for all the universities, but the ones that I've been to often have mental health services, but they're often, again, under a lot of pressure and sometimes underinvested. And I find it
mm,
challenging because such a stressful environment and they don't support enough the people. And at the same
yeah.
time, I also find that in academia, what I didn't like personally, it's just the sort of day-to-day motions. Like you still come in, you do the science, you hope for the best, you write papers, you apply for grants, and then rinse and repeat the same circle again.
Yes, absolutely. So what's mental health like in industry?
So I actually found it fascinating. And you will probably laugh, but coming from Lithuania, a country in Eastern Europe, I often grew up in an environment where mental health was kind of shunned about, where it was said like, oh, you have to be strong, that
Oh
sort of
yeah, yeah,
thing.
same here, absolutely. Same here. Yeah.
Exactly. And so coming to England as a whole was a bit of an eye opener that mental health is something not to be laughed about. It's a serious thing, and you have to take care of it, and you have to take care of yourself and your friends. And so I was already kind of shocked in academia, but then when I moved to industry, I was shocked a bit further because we actually have courses here like how to take care of yourself, how to spot signs of a burnout in yourself and in colleagues. Like if somebody
Mm,
withdraws from a conversation, if somebody doesn't attend the usual like coffee afternoons, they might be just wanting to withdraw, or there could be signs of something else. And they also teach us the sort of ways to politely ask about somebody. Are they feeling okay? Are you stressed? Is there anything bothering you? And I find that very helpful. Like that is an actual investment into people capital and sort of taking care of mental health. Whilst
mm,
a good friend of mine actually went through the ringer recently, and she said that in academia, if you as a student are stressed and you have, for example, ADHD and you cannot complete a deadline, you as a student yourself have to reach out to the mental health institutions, yourself
mm,
finish forms and give them the details so that you can defer the deadline. And then you realize that if you have ADHD, the deadline referral doesn't help because you just continue to procrastinate until the new deadline arrives. That's not how you
mm,
solve the situation. So yes, sorry, I talk way too much, but coming back again, I find that in industry, mental health is a lot more taken care of than in academia.
absolutely. And you know what? To add on top of this, what I found within my company, which I think is absolutely brilliant, is that if I have too much work, right, I am encouraged to actually, send a mass email to everyone and just, ask for help and literally ask for a volunteer to do part of my job for me. And the brilliant part of it is that, I send this email, please could someone, analyze this data for me? I don't even have to explain myself. And literally within 5, 10 minutes, I have, a few emails back from people saying, yeah, sure. I have spare time, I'll do it for you. So I think it's just absolutely brilliant that you're never left alone to do everything. And even when work is mounting up, and it feels like if you were going to do it on your own, you would have to work over the weekend. Um, Here you don't have to because you actually have a full support network. And 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 you don't even have such a big chance to burn out because people will take extra work off you. And I think,
100%.
yeah.
100% agree. Actually, even was going to ask you because you mentioned it, reaching out, like being synchronized with the rest of the team and sharing the tasks. In my workplace, what we do is often quantify, so put a number behind the task. Because in academia, it used to be, okay, you need to isolate the DNA, then you need to generate the cell lines and then test the cell lines. Over here, what we think about is, okay, generate the DNA. So that's 16 hours, for example, 2 full working days to get the DNA. We put the number behind it, not to, just as an exercise, but basically saying, hold on a second, you're doing 16 hours here, 16 hours here, and 16 hours here. Something has to go because that's, a week only has so many hours that you can work as. And that numbering actually helps yourself and your management say, okay, maybe we shouldn't give you that task. Let's give it to the other person because they have a bit more free time. And so that preserves your mental health and just the workload, makes life a little bit more bearable.
Yeah, exactly. And when I was in academia, I was always told I'm a part of a team. But I sort of said, yeah, okay, fine, I'm a part of a team. But now in the industry, yes, I am definitely a part of a team because I have people I can fall back on who will actually, take a lot of my work if needs to be and do it for me. And, when I go on annual leave, it's not like that my work stops. No, I distribute all of my work, literally everything, you know, between my colleagues. And they do it for me. It's just such a kind environment, and it's the same way when they leave. I pick up the work if I have spare time. Everything is always covered. Um, so it's sort of like you're never left behind with anything. How do you
Actually,
feel about this?
I was actually going to say that what you just said hit the nail on the head. What I find from my own personal experience is that in academia, you have a lab, you have one PI, you have postdocs, you have PhD students, you maybe have a research technician, lab technician. Everybody's working in a sort of similar vein, gene editing, the big letters. But somebody is working on mouse embryonic cells. Somebody is working on physical electroporation. Somebody is working on the DNA techniques. But they're all separate projects.
Exactly.
And a lot of labs are often not as intermingled, not as mixed together. What ends up happening is that a person working on embryonic stem cells, well, they're just left to their own devices because the person works on the DNA. Well, they're super good at the DNA work, but they can't really help you grow the cells, and vice versa. Whilst here, industry, I find it interesting because even though we are specialists in our fields, I mean, I am a gene editing person. There are people in my team who can still pick up those tasks and still do them. They're not experts on the cutting edge technologies, but they can still, carry out cloning, carry out gene editing, carry out cell growing. And so you don't feel as if you're left on your own devices. You still got somebody, looking over your shoulder saying, don't worry, we got this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a positive change, isn't it? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I
Sorry.
Go on, Pat. Go on, Pat.
Now I was going to say that I find that sort of camaraderie does help, that the sort of teamwork. It's going to sound cheesy, but teamwork makes the dream work. Oh God, that's cheesy.
Yeah, but it's very true. Unfortunately, it is exactly what it is in academia. Everyone has their own project, and you have your lab meetings. You are part of a larger group, but in the end of the day, when when you need to go for a holiday, for example, or when you want to go somewhere, when you're not there, no one is going to do your work. they might maintain your cells, or they might do some basic tasks for you, but your work will not progress anywhere, right? And also when things go wrong, it's basically just you and your PI troubleshooting this, but your PI has so many other things to troubleshoot, right? And and really it's just mostly you troubleshooting, optimizing on your own. But in industry, what I found is that I have a team of people working on the same project. So if a project is not moving forward, we are all in it. We are all actively, engaged in conversations to try to figure out, what to do. Um, and this is just a great support network to have.
Yeah, but not much really to add there. 100% agree.
Yeah. So which is great to hear because my role is an office desk, is office based completely. Your role is much more hands-on in a lab. So it's great, that people can hear that you have the support either whether you're in a lab doing actual, pipetting and everything, and when you're based in an office in front of a laptop. Um, that's brilliant. Right, Pat. I think we need to, hit the main question of the day and wrap it up, and then we'll move on in the next episode. So, Pat, why did you leave academia?
Oh, yes, the million-dollar question. Good gosh, where do we begin? Right, towards the end of the PhD days, I had the sort of like decision to do. Industry or academia? Could have been a postdoc, could have been a scientist. And at the time, I was somewhat slightly burned out. I was tired of it all, and I was writing up my thesis and all that. And I realized in academia, there's not really any stability. I found that, yes, you find a postdoc, you find a fascinating field to work in, you apply your skill set, you grow, but the funding dries out. It's usually a 1 year, 2 year, if you're lucky, 5 year postdoc. But what then? You again
Mm.
have to apply for a grant. If you're unsuccessful, you apply for grants in, say, another university, another lab. So you have to move, you have to uproot your whole life and put it somewhere else. And it's just a hassle. It's mentally challenging, and especially so for listeners who might have families, who might have uh,
Other
uh,
responsibilities outside of work, just yeah, anything bigger
exactly.
than yeah.
I mean, everybody's talking about the hot topic nowadays, the housing market. What if you just bought a house and you suddenly, you lose a job and you have to go to the other town? Can you really
Mm.
commute for, say, 3 hours every day, one way and then back? That's just not feasible, just not going to happen. So I find myself in that dilemma and I was thinking ahead into the future. And at the time, I told myself, you know what? Everybody says that industry is restrictive, that you just told what you're going to do. And I thought to myself, okay, I'll just bear it out. I'll just do it. And I still got hobbies outside of work. I love Lindy Hop. I love dancing. I also love hiking, have a lot of friends. And I thought I'll just use it as a support, sort of like income to have my hobbies. And spoiler alert, I was way off with that. Basically, I came to industry and realized nobody's really telling you what to do. Sure, there's an overarching agenda, overarching goal, but it's like, yeah, you got a year to achieve this project. If you somehow magically conjure up the data in a month's time, great, job's a good one. If it takes you 2 years, that's perfectly fine. As long as you justify it. Say there was a COVID pandemic and we couldn't have reagents come in, nobody's gonna shout on you and say that you haven't done the work. No, they're just gonna
Mm.
keep on paying you, say that, yeah, makes sense, nothing we can do. And I compare that to academia again. In academia, some people did have an extension to their grants, but a lot of people were stuck in an area where essentially you have a project to do, you have papers to write up, but the coronavirus just shut down all the labs. What do you do?
Mm.
How do you fulfill your obligations without access to data, access to lab work, access to sort of facilities you need for your bread and butter work?
Absolutely. Okay, Pat, I have so many questions about, what is this like to actually work as a scientist in industry, and, any misconceptions that people might have that you had about industry before you joined. So, you know what? Let's dive deeper into this next week we meet. And for now, let's just wrap it up. because we don't want to probably keep people for an hour just listening to us talking about the random stuff. So, but thank you so much for this. This was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I'll see you and everyone else next week. Okay.
See you next week.
Thank you. See you later.